Wastewater data recently has been a shit show, and we just found out that part of the reason for this is that Biobot is legally contesting the contract manufacturer switch by the CDC from Biobot to Alphabet's Verily. Before we dive into this article, let's talk about wastewater data. Approximately 1,400 wastewater sites report data to the CDC in regards to COVID. Of these 14, over 400 wastewater sites are impacted by this contract. This is because certain states like Nebraska and Minnesota, instead of having state-sponsored programs, opted to use the contract manufacturer to fund their wastewater sites and to manage their wastewater sites and collect the data and report the data. Alternatively, other states like New York own their entire wastewater reporting system for the entire state. Then you have other systems like Wastewater Scan, which is completely outside of the CDC, where they are funded by grants and philanthropy donations, which make those types of wastewater sites unimpacted by this issue. Now, let's dive in. After an open bidding process earlier this year, the CDC decided to replace its longtime contractor Biobot with Verily. But this transition in contractors is on pause while the Government Accountability Office hears Biobot's appeal. And while this appeal is going on, Verily can't do its work, which means that a quarter of the nation's wastewater testing sites are shut down indefinitely over this contract dispute. Now, this contractor switching was a bit of a surprise because the CDC has worked with Biobot since 2020 to test wastewater for COVID and has developed a huge system and structure around Biobot. And this is even more surprising because they recently won an opiate drug testing contract, which would have made you think that they would have won the 5-year contract that was actually awarded to Verily. And the decision of this appeal is due in January, which is a huge problem because we're in the middle of a surge right now, where this gap in wastewater testing data will likely continue for several months as we continue to head into the winter surge. And I've said before in different videos, it's not as easy as just handing the quote-unquote keys to Verily, because they have to establish new relations, they have to develop testing methods, verify the testing methods, continue developing methods to process and report on the data on their own website, and then there's even the issue of integrating historic data. Because when you switch vendors, you change these methodologies and you can't really compare apples to apples. It's like starting from day zero with a new surveillance system. So while there likely already would have been issues with this transfer from Biobot to Verily in terms of reporting and data transfer issues, now 400 sites are just completely shut down because of this dispute. And the CDC to date still not only has not announced this contract change, they haven't stated why they made this contract change, but as always, we always know it comes down to money. Verily's contract is for $38 million over 5 years, and Biobot's most recent contract was for about $31 million for over less than a year and a half. So much for transparency, Maddie Cohen. And with more BS, Bradley White, the principal scientist for Verily Wastewater Labs, said the company is ready to go with much of its infrastructure already built. But if one simply goes to the website, they can find many glitches and issues with how the site actually functions. In addition, it's basically a knockoff junk copy of Wastewater Scan, and it doesn't do any of the processing abilities that Biobot did. There's no year-over-year data. We would lose our historic comparison abilities. We would lose the ability to see regional data, and they also don't have an aggregate so we can see all of the nation's data all at once. So, more poop from Bradley in this situation. But at least now we know why it's taking so long for Verily to start reporting data. Ultimately, this whole situation really sucks, and it's really just hurting us, the American citizens, because due to this, many states are losing their ability to even have functional wastewater facilities because Biobot was doing it for them, and it is also not insignificant to lose a quarter of your reporting wastewater facilities when you're looking at national trends and national data.